"Ma'am, if you can't pay the emergency deposit, we can't admit him yet." My son was fighting for air in my arms when the doctor said it. Matteo's tiny fingers clawed weakly at my hoodie, while his breathing came out in sharp, broken whistles. The crowded waiting room smelled like disinfectant and sweat, voices echoing off the walls, but all I could hear was my 6-year-old gasping against my shoulder. "I already paid," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I transferred the money this afternoon." The receptionist glanced nervously at the older doctor standing beside her. Dr. Alan Mercer barely looked at Matteo. "We need payment first," he said flatly. "We don't treat for free." A few people in the waiting room turned to stare. "Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates." I felt every eye on me. "Please," I whispered, "he can't breathe." Mercer folded his arms, "Then show proof of payment." My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped my phone. Matteo coughed hard against my chest, and one of the nurses instinctively stepped forward before Mercer stopped her with a look. "Don't," he said. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I unlocked my banking app, shoved the screen toward him, and said loudly enough for the entire waiting room to hear, "Then explain the transfer you already took." The room went silent. For the first time since I walked in, Dr. Mercer's expression changed. Not sympathy. Fear. I read out the exact amount and timestamp from the transfer receipt, while Matteo wheezed against my shoulder. The receptionist frowned at her monitor. "That payment isn't showing in the system." Mercer answered too quickly. Then she was scammed by a third-party processor. "No," I said immediately. "Your billing department called me directly." I hit speakerphone on my bank call. After a few seconds, the representative's voice filled the waiting room. "Yes, Ms. Cruz. The transfer was completed at 3:42 p.m. and electronically accepted by St. Aurelius Urgent Care." A murmur spread through the room. The nurse beside me looked confused. "Accepted by who?" The bank representative continued. "We have confirmation that the receiving clinic signed for the transfer." Dr. Mercer's jaw tightened. Matteo suddenly coughed so hard his body jerked in my arms. "Mom," he rasped. I held him tighter. "Baby, stay with me." Mercer stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, creating a disturbance here won't help your son." I stared at him. "You already took everything I had." The receptionist slowly reached for Matteo's intake bracelet. Then, quietly, she removed it from his wrist. Like he wasn't even a patient anymore. A man near the vending machines muttered, "That kid needs help." Another person lifted their phone and started recording. Mercer noticed immediately. "What transfer?" he asked sharply. But this time he wasn't asking me. He was staring directly at the nurse, trying to pull up the billing records on the computer beside him. And then I saw it. Dr. Mercer moved fast, too fast, stepping between the nurse and the screen before she could open the payment history. Matteo's coughing turned violent so suddenly that his entire body curled against my chest. "Please," I shouted, "somebody help him." The younger nurse who'd hesitated earlier grabbed an oxygen mask from a nearby cart without asking permission. Her hands moved fast as she pressed it gently over Matteo's face. "Slow breath, sweetheart," she whispered. For 1 second, I thought someone was finally going to help us. Then Dr. Mercer's voice cut across the hallway. "Nurse Bennett, step away from the patient." She froze. "He needs oxygen," she said carefully. "He needs billing clearance," Mercer replied. I stared at him in disbelief. "Are you hearing yourself right now?" Matteo's breathing crackled through the mask. The nurse ignored Mercer long enough to increase the oxygen flow slightly before stepping back. I mouthed a silent thank you to her, and she looked away nervously. That voice, hearing Mercer speak again, made something click in my head. "You called me earlier," I said slowly. Mercer's eyes narrowed. "You're the one who told me to send the money." He didn't answer. The memory slammed back into me all at once. Sitting in my car outside my second job that afternoon, Matteo asleep in the backseat after another coughing fit. A man from the hospital billing department warning me that uninsured emergency patients could face delays without an upfront deposit. I'd emptied almost $4,000 from the savings account I'd been building since Matteo was born. Every extra shift, every skipped meal, every dollar. And now this man was acting like I'd invented the payment. Mercer lightly grabbed my elbow and guided me away from the waiting room crowd. "You need to calm down," he said quietly near the hallway entrance. I pulled my arm back immediately. "You took my money. Accounting mistakes happen constantly." "Then why did your tone change the second I mentioned the transfer?" His expression hardened. "If you continue accusing this hospital publicly, security can remove you from the property." I laughed once in disbelief. "My son can barely breathe and you're threatening me." "I'm trying to help you avoid making this worse." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Not fix this. Not help Matteo. Help me avoid making it worse. Like there was already something to hide. Before I could answer, someone brushed past me quickly. The receptionist. She kept her head down as she slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. "Don't let him see that," she whispered. Then she hurried away. I unfolded the paper immediately. It was part of a shredded payment receipt. Only half of it remained, but the final 4 transaction digits were visible. They matched mine exactly. My stomach dropped. I looked up just as Mercer noticed the paper in my hand. For the first time, he looked genuinely nervous. Before I could confront him, Matteo suddenly gasped through the oxygen mask, his eyes squeezing shut. "Mom!" 2 nurses rushed forward with a wheelchair. "We need to move him now," one said. Mercer stepped directly into their path. "Nobody touches that patient until billing clears him." The hallway went dead silent. Then one of the nurses pushed past him anyway. They wheeled Matteo toward the treatment rooms while I followed beside him, gripping his hand. As the doors swung open behind us, I turned back for 1 second and saw 2 security guards escorting the receptionist into Mercer's office while he slammed the door shut behind them. "Open that door." My voice echoed across the waiting room as I pointed at Mercer's office. Nobody moved. The receptionist was still inside. I could hear muffled arguing through the wall, while Matteo's oxygen machine hissed somewhere behind me in the treatment area. Dr. Mercer adjusted his coat like nothing had happened. "You need to focus on your son," he said calmly. "I am focused on my son," I snapped. "That's why I want to know why your employee is being dragged into an office after giving me proof you took my money." People nearby stopped pretending not to listen. A woman holding an ice pack whispered, "She already paid." A man near the front desk lifted his phone higher and started recording openly now. Mercer noticed immediately. "This woman is spreading misinformation during an active medical situation," he announced loudly. "Pending bank transfers are often misunderstood." I pulled out my phone so fast I almost dropped it. "No," I said. "You told me yourself the payment cleared treatment." I opened my voicemail recordings and hit play. The room filled with static for half a second. Then Mercer's voice came through clearly. "Once the transfer clears, your son will be admitted immediately." Silence. Every person in the waiting room turned toward him. Mercer's face tightened instantly. "That recording is incomplete," he said. "But the damage was done." The younger nurse from earlier slowly looked down at the desk beside her before speaking quietly. Matteo's file was already marked before arrival. I turned toward her. "What does that mean?" She hesitated. Mercer cut in sharply. "Nurse Bennett." "It means," she said quickly, "his chart was flagged as financial hold this afternoon." The room erupted with confused voices. My heart started pounding harder. "You flagged my son before he even got here." No one answered me. That was the moment I realized this wasn't chaos. This was planned. Mercer tried regaining control immediately. Security, he barked. Remove anyone recording staff members. But neither guard moved. Too many phones were pointed at him now. A teenager sitting beside the vending machine said loudly, "Nah, keep filming." Another woman stood up. That child could have died. Mercer's composure cracked for half a second. People like her leave out details, he snapped. Hospitals deal with this every day. People like her. I saw the exact moment the waiting room turned against him. The receptionist suddenly stumbled out of the office, clutching a thick folder against her chest. Her eyes were red from crying. Mercer stepped toward her immediately. "Go home," he warned. Her hands trembled violently. "The payments," she whispered. "Stop talking," Mercer said. She looked directly at me. "The payments don't go straight into hospital billing anymore." The waiting room exploded with questions. "What does that mean? Did they steal the money? How many people?" Mercer grabbed her arm. "You're confused." She jerked away from him, so fast the folder slipped from her hands. Papers scattered across the waiting room floor. I looked down. Every page was covered in handwritten patient names, payment amounts, and red markings beside certain files, including one that said, "Second payment still pending." Papers slid across the tile floor as people bent down to read them. One man picked up a page and frowned. "What the hell is pending reallocation?" I grabbed another sheet before Mercer could reach it. Rows of names filled the page beside payment amounts and handwritten notes in red ink. "Delay admission until second payment confirmed." My stomach turned cold. "This isn't just me," I whispered. Around me, the waiting room noise changed completely. People weren't confused anymore. They were angry. Mercer lunged for the papers. "Those are internal documents." The receptionist backed away from him, shaking. "No," she said weakly. "No, I'm done." "Think carefully before you speak," Mercer warned. But something inside her finally broke. "You told us it was temporary," she cried. "You said the holding account was legal." The room went silent again. "Holding account?" I stared at her. "What holding account?" Her breathing became uneven as she looked around at all the phones recording her. "Payments from uninsured emergency patients were being redirected first," she admitted. "People got told their transfers were delayed or incomplete." A woman near the chairs suddenly interrupted. "So they'd pay again?" The receptionist closed her eyes. "Yes." The word hit the room like a bomb. Someone cursed loudly. Another man demanded names. I looked back down at the papers in my hands and noticed dates, circled beside multiple patient files. One name had a note underneath. "Left without payment resolution." The receptionist saw me reading it. "That was a mother with a little girl," she said quietly. 2 weeks ago, they told her the transfer never arrived." "What happened to them?" I asked. Her silence answered me. At that exact moment, 2 police officers and paramedics rushed through the entrance doors. A patient near the vending machines pointed directly at Mercer. "That doctor's refusing treatment over fake missing payments." The officers immediately separated Mercer from the staff. Mercer tried switching tactics fast. "This is being misunderstood," he said calmly. "The account system was for emergency verification processing." I stepped forward. "Then why did you recognize my transfer the second I said the amount?" Mercer didn't answer. I kept going. "You flagged my son before we even got here. You told staff not to touch him until another payment cleared." One officer turned toward Mercer. "Did you authorize this holding account?" Mercer opened his mouth, but said nothing. "Too long. Way too long." Then suddenly, from inside the treatment area, a monitor alarm started screaming. My blood froze. "Mateos." I dropped the papers and ran toward the treatment room doors. Behind me, I heard one officer shout, "Sir, stop right there." I turned just long enough to see Mercer trying to slip down a side hallway before police grabbed his arm. By the time I reached Matteo's room, 3 nurses were already surrounding his bed. One adjusted his oxygen, while another pushed medication into his IV line. "Move back, Mom," a doctor said quickly. "We are stabilizing him." I stood frozen near the doorway, my hands shaking so badly I had to grip the wall to stay upright. Matteo looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. The monitor kept beeping rapidly while the staff worked over him. And all I could think was, this almost happened because they wanted another payment. A few minutes later, the alarms finally slowed. One nurse exhaled hard. "He's responding." My knees nearly gave out. I covered my mouth and started crying before I could stop myself. Not loud, not dramatic, just pure exhaustion pouring out of me all at once. Outside the room, the entire hospital had changed. Police officers were moving staff into separate offices one by one. Patients and families crowded the hallways whispering, while reporters were already gathering outside the entrance doors. The receptionist, the same woman who slipped me the shredded receipt, sat beside an officer holding a cup of water with trembling hands. This time she told them everything. Months earlier, Mercer and the clinic administrator had created what they called a priority holding system. Uninsured emergency payments were secretly diverted into a separate account before reaching official billing. Families in crisis were told transfers hadn't arrived yet. Some panicked and paid a second time just to avoid treatment delays. Others were sent home. Complaints disappeared into pending verification reviews. My transfer had cleared hours before I ever carried Matteo into that hospital. And Mercer knew it. That was why his face changed the second I read the amount out loud. He had personally approved the transfer himself earlier that afternoon. A nurse quietly approached me near the hallway. It was Nurse Bennett. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "We should have said something sooner." "You helped him," I whispered. She looked down. "Not enough." A few feet away, the receptionist suddenly started crying again. "I tried quitting," she admitted to the officers. "After the little girl came in 2 weeks ago, they made her mother pay twice before admitting her." The officer writing notes stopped and looked up slowly. "What little girl?" The receptionist wiped her face. "She didn't make it back in time." The hallway went dead silent. By morning, videos from the waiting room were everywhere online. Former patients started coming forward within hours. People posted screenshots of duplicate transfers, delayed refunds, denied admissions. Reporters surrounded the hospital entrance all day, while state investigators carried boxes of financial records out through the front doors. The clinic's accounts were frozen before the week ended. Dr. Mercer's medical license was suspended pending investigation, and fraud charges followed almost immediately alongside child endangerment allegations. The clinic administrator disappeared for 3 days before police finally arrested him at a motel outside the city. St. Aurelius Urgent Care shut down completely during the investigation. Families, including mine, were contacted by attorneys offering legal representation and reimbursement claims. A month earlier, I was a terrified 22-year-old mother begging strangers to help my son breathe. Now investigators called me their primary witness. I still remembered the way Mercer looked at me in that waiting room, like I was worthless because I couldn't afford to argue back. But in the end, the same crowded room he used to humiliate me became the place where everything collapsed around him. Weeks later, Matteo was finally healthy enough to run around again. One afternoon, I sat on a bench near a playground while he chased another little boy across the grass, laughing so hard he could barely stand upright. My phone buzzed in my hand. News alert, former hospital owner Dr. Alan Mercer formally charged in medical fraud scheme. I stared at the screen for a moment before locking my phone. Then I looked back at my son. Alive. Breathing. Free. A few days later, I received a handwritten letter from the receptionist. "Thank you for not staying quiet." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into my bag, while Matteo waved at me from the playground. For the first time in weeks, I smiled back without fear. The payment was never missing. Humanity was.